Good evening and welcome to the Cyprian Kane Show on WTRP. I'm Cyprian Kane. And here's a pleasant song for you. Sometimes love eases the pain when you feel like your world's gonna end. And this time, love fills me with desire and all of them things that I wanna let in, girl. Why don't you ever stop just to think about it, baby? Why don't you ever stop just to think about us? Like when you say you can call me baby, you can call me now, you can call me over when you're feeling down. You can call me sometime strange, strange. Girl, I thought you'd call me one of these days. And when my heart was broken like a wing, girl, you came along and you mended my soul. Now I know what love is. Yes, I know what love is. And one thing I'll say for sure is that it burns me like a flame, girl. Why don't you ever stop just to think about it, baby? Why don't you ever stop just to think about us? Like when you say you can call me baby, you can call me now, you can call me over when you're feeling down, and you can call me sometimes, or you can call me Kane, I'm Kane. But girl, I thought you'd call me one of these days. One of these days. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a fantastic show planned for you tonight. I am very honored and pleasured to be able to invite my guest, Martin Markovich, back to the radio show.
It's good to see you, Cyprian.
Martin, it's wonderful to see you. I understand that you have something very special planned for us tonight.
Well, we wanted to talk about the big bands today.
Now, before we do, I wanted to mention one thing, if I may. And that is your upcoming book that you're working on, The Cold War, Humanity Dodges a Bullet. Can you tell me a little bit about that, or give us a little teaser maybe?
Well, thank you very much, Cyprian. That is a history of the Cold War, and I am in the process of writing it, which is challenging enough, and we eventually hope to publish it or distribute it to a large number of people. It's a long process and one I have not been through before, but I'm really enjoying writing the book, and as we've discussed, hopefully we can have a podcast about that at some point on your channel.
I am
looking forward to that because I want to hear more about how humanity dodged a bullet, and I feel like I know the story, but I want to hear it in depth, and I want to hear it from the perspective you tell it. But tonight we have something very special planned for our listeners, and that is we are going to be going back in the time machine, back before rock and roll. Last time we talked about rock and roll, and that was a very interesting show, I have to say. But tonight we discover the big band era, and who better to take us through it than Dr. Markovich.
Hey, Cyprian, and we knew when we planned this that some of our listeners may never have even heard of the big bands. Others may have heard of it once or twice, but not be quite sure what it was. So we thought we'd start out with 3 samples, and in conformity to copyright law, we can only play 7-second samples. But these 3 samples we prepared for you, I think, will give you a little idea of what the big bands were like in their heyday, now 80 years ago. And for the first one, we have the beginning to "In the Mood" by the Glenn Miller Band. And woo! Thank you. And
that was hot.
Yeah, and we encourage everybody to go and listen to these. They are available on YouTube and other places as well. And we'll mention all of these, whether you heard of them or not, were very big hits in their era. And we had millions of people all over this country and all over the world dancing to these songs. So our second selection is a song called "Cheery Beery Bin" by Harry James and his band. And this is the beginning of Harry's trumpet solo. And you got the flavor of that one. Very typical, 2 very typical instrumentals of the big band era. And the third one is a vocal, the beginning of the verse, I believe, from "Blues in the Night" by Cab Calloway, an incredible performer, and also has some of his videos from way back when are still available on YouTube. So let's listen to that one.
Mama done told me when I was in deep pants. My mama done told me, son.
All right.
Son, she told him.
Yeah. So that hopefully gives our listeners an idea of what the big bands were like and their sound, and of course there's literally thousands of additional recordings still from that period, which the peak of the big bands was the late 1930s and the early 1940s, although, of course, there still are big bands playing in schools and shows, at dances, but they were the dominant form of music in this country way back then during that period. Did you have any comments or reaction you wanted to?
Yes, provide? I was going to say we have to play that again. Now listen to this closely. If you've never heard this tune before, listen to Glenn Miller's "In the Mood," just the intro to it again. You might know it by me going on just a little bit more with that, but that is it does put you in the mood. All these songs that you picked, Martin, I have to say, they're very diverse, okay? If you look at the song, for instance, by Cab Calloway, juxtaposed with what's happening here and "In the Mood," totally different types of genres even, but they're still within the big band
right
umbrella.
And we'll talk about the definition of big bands in a little bit. But I wanted to talk to our listeners about how I got to know the big bands and why I have a passion for them so many years after they were kings of the hill. And frankly, the big bands were the music of my parents' generation, and they danced to the big bands, to what was available at the particular time and place they were. And
Now,
they,
were there special dances? Like, you know how in the 20s they had the Charleston?
yeah, I believe there were dances. I wouldn't want to say which ballroom dances were particularly in vogue, when which recordings were made, because I don't know that. But yes, the big bands were a dancing act.
I seem to recall the wagging of the finger in the air.
Yeah.
The dancing. Do you remember that? Have you ever seen that? Like, da na 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 na.
Yeah. Well, of course, they were in Hollywood too, and movies. A lot of movies were made with various big bands and dancing arrangements. But one point we should make relative to dancing is when they started, it was the Depression, and people didn't have a lot of money, and artists didn't have a lot of money, so the artists would get together in the big bands, which were large groups of 12 or more people, and they would tour around, and the musicians didn't get much money, but they knew as long as they were with the band, they would at least get fed. And likewise, the people at that time didn't have much money, but they would all come, the whole time, practically everybody in the town, most of the people in the town, would come and hear the big band perform. And in those days, it might only be a dime each, but they would go in, and then they would dance for several hours, and they didn't need any.
That's how they got paid. Everybody in town showed up.
Yeah, everybody in town showed up, and they played for hours, and people didn't have much money, but they had a lot of energy, and they just danced frenetically in a lot of cases for hours and hours, and that kept them occupied without spending too much money, other than the dime or maybe the quarter it cost for them to come in.
Yes, so, and when you think about it, kept them in good shape too.
Kept them in great shape, and was a real highlight for the members of that generation, most of whom have left us now.
I was going to say, I would have loved to have just gone to one of those shows with the big band coming in through town and everybody showing up wearing their best clothes. And
yeah, so as a youngster, I got exposed to the music, and also got exposed to other kinds of music by my family. But I took to the big bands as a small child, and still love them. In my family, music was not as much of a conflict, and especially our generation, the baby boom generation. There would be conflict between the parents not liking the rock and roll that the kids would want to play, the kids thinking that the parents' music was very square and they wanted nothing to do with it. And I did listen to the music of my generation too, like we talked about in the last show, but there wasn't that level of conflict with my parents, and we won't go into all the factors that contributed to that, but I was very glad to actually pick up at least two major art forms for my parents. One, the big bands, and two, silent movies, which we're planning to cover again in a future show.
Stay tuned, folks. That one's going to be a good one.
So anyway, the big bands had their heyday. They were the kings of the hill, and then their era passed. We can talk a little bit about that. But even though it's been 80 years now, a great style can never really go away. And the natural of appeal that the big bands had with their combination of instruments and vocals, we are a little bit of both, and the swing approach to music, that's always there to be discovered, thanks to the technological marvel of recorded music. You can still listen to the big bands, and you can still hear new big bands playing. So if you don't have any other questions or comments at this point, let's talk about what are the big bands. And the first thing, just to clarify, is the big band sound is a type of jazz. That definitely falls in the category of jazz.
Okay, so it's under that bigger umbrella.
Yeah, it's part of jazz, and the jazz characteristics of the music include the swing rhythm. There's a certain rhythm known as swing, which maybe we'll get musicologists to come in and tell us about that. But it's a definite rhythmic approach to the music, which
I've experimented with some of it on Pro Tools. The swing.
Yeah.
They have swing settings on there.
Right. Emphasis on the off beats is one of them.
Very interesting stuff.
Yeah, not to get too technical.
No.
But anyway, yeah, the swing rhythm was a huge part of it. Then there was the instrumentation. We already mentioned that there were 12 or more players. Typically, the big bands consisted of brass, which is to say trumpets and trombones, reeds, which are several tenor and alto saxophones, and also a clarinet, or a few clarinets could be in that mix. That's also a reed instrument. And then a rhythm section, which consists of at least 3 members, a drummer, a stand-up bass player. Electric bass wasn't really a thing at that time, and a pianist who would play the piano. And then the big bands would have 1 or 2 vocalists, typically, though not all of them. So, and the third aspect of jazz, which the big bands also employed, although not as much as some of the later jazz styles, that is improvisation. Improvised solos. The big bands had a balance between the head arrangements, the prepared intros and pieces of the music, but
and they knew when to color outside the lines, right? They knew when it was time to take a break and go around this way.
Yeah. Well, they would let
cut loose, guys.
Yeah, they would let typically 1, 2, 3 members of the band play solos, usually in the middle of the song. And you hear a lot of that, and then those solos became an even more dominant part of jazz as it evolved further. So those are the 3 elements that characterize it as the jazz of its era. The type of jazz which prevailed before the big bands was Dixieland jazz, which is associated with New Orleans. Then,
which a lot of people wouldn't associate with jazz, wouldn't think Dixieland and jazz are the same thing. But still, we're talking about a music that's covered several genres.
Right. And the evolution of the music, and just like your rock music evolved from the 50s to the 60s.
Well,
to the 70s.
So I was going to say, with rock music, you have rock, but you also have heavy.
Yeah.
You have light. You have all these different kinds, but then you also have things which are like rap, which I consider to be a form of rock.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's an offshoot of rock. It's a form of it.
Right.
Definitely huge.
Right.
Form of music these days, but still an offshoot. And at the same time, what you're saying with jazz comes from Dixieland, then.
Right. That was one of the early manifestations of jazz, which was that was popular in the 20s, even before the big bands, and then the Dixieland style, which involved a smaller group of typically 4 or 5 instruments. That evolved into the big bands.
Now, like for instance, with that, when the Saints go marching in, would that be Dixieland?
It can be played in Dixieland style.
That's the way I hear it.
One thing about the Dixieland style is often you get 2 soloists playing at the same time, where they're kind of playing off each other.
Oh, kind of like that.
Yeah.
Intertwining.
Yeah, what in classical music they call polyphony.
Yes.
So in the Dixieland style, there was a lot of improvisation, and then when it went to the big bands, it became a little more refined and a little more organized, with just one, with the band playing together at the beginning, then the soloist coming in with his or her solo, and then the band playing the arrangement at the end. So different phases of different kinds of music, whether it's classical, jazz, rock, folk, country, rap. Different phases of it will show different styles. But we're on the big band jazz style.
Yes, the big band.
And I wanted to mention one other thing. We also something that can be obvious to any listener, but you might not think about it.
Yes, and I was going to ask you a question too.
Yeah, sure.
About the form of the song.
Yeah.
Are you going to discuss that?
Yes, that's what I was just getting to.
Oh, good. I'm looking forward to this because I found this very interesting compared to modern music.
Yeah. Well, the popular song has been around for at least 150 years in this country, and we had Stephen Foster.
Yes, I love
before
Stephen Foster.
before the Civil War.
Yes.
So and the popular form of music for a long time has been characterized by choruses, which consist of both the verse and the chorus, and typically could be 32 bars. 32 bars, usually somewhere between 30 seconds and a minute, depending on the tempo.
Mm-hmm.
And the song might consist of 4 32-bar choruses. And that's been something that the big bands did, and that is still being done today by a lot of, I believe, by Taylor Swift and Beyonce and anybody else who let's say a lot of artists who are very successful today, they're still writing choruses with 32 bars, and their song consists of 3, 4, 5 choruses. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So that hasn't changed. The big bands followed that form a great deal, but where they came in, where they were different, what you don't typically hear today, but what the big bands did was the first 2 choruses would often be purely instrumental. And very often the whole band, 12, 15 instruments all playing together in an arrangement. So the first 2, and the melody would usually be carried by either the saxophones or the trumpets or both. So you'd hear the first 2 choruses would just be instrumental, like we heard in the first 2 examples we played. Then the third chorus, the singer would come in and sing the chorus, and a lot of the bands had female singers, and they would sing, for one chorus they would sing a verse of the song and the chorus of the song, so they would sing the lyrics, and it would be vocal. But then for the fourth chorus, it would go back to the band playing it instrumentally. So in rough terms, and of course there were variations on this too, but in rough terms, a lot of those recordings were 3/4 instrumental and 1/4 vocal in the middle. And I always thought that was a wonderful balance between the instrumentals and the vocals.
Isn't it true that in the final aspect of the song, the final chorus they're doing after the vocals are sung, that the motif changes? It stays the same motif, but they're doing something different here now to adjust it, make it fresher.
Right. They might just like a lot of songs have intros, which may be related to the body of the song, but maybe in the same key or whatever it is. But the intro is not exactly the same as the melody of the verse or the chorus. So same thing with this instrumental endings to the big band songs. It might be a little bit different. Might be in the same key. Might be a variation on it, but it would be something that they felt was appropriate to end the song on an exciting note.
Yes, so, and it is exciting too. Big band music, for you folks out there that have not had an opportunity yet to go out and listen to some big band, it's right in front of you on YouTube and everything else. Please check it out. It's fantastic.
Okay, well, let's talk about some of the major bands of that era and mention a few of their hits. And one of the biggest stars of that era, the guy who really paved the way for the big band era, was Louis Armstrong. Satchmo. And a lot of people know him as Louis Armstrong. He himself preferred to be called Louis.
Okay.
But either way, we know who he was, the great trumpeter who lived from, I believe, 1900 to 1971 or so, and who developed jazz, developed the swing style of playing. Even when he started with smaller groups than big bands, but he exemplified that swing approach and playing with swing, which not everybody could do at that time, but everybody wanted to be like Satchmo, and every serious jazz instrumentalist of that day tried to play with that swing style. So then when the big bands did come in, Louis Armstrong did have his own big band, which was very successful, and a couple of his big hits, which he both sang and played trumpet on. One was Ain't Misbehaving, the Fats Waller tune, which has continued to be a hit throughout our lifetimes. I imagine some of our listeners have heard that song.
Oh, yeah.
And then Armstrong had another one called I Got a Right to Sing the Blues, which was a very big hit for him in those days. And then even after the big band era passed, he continued to be one of worldwide popular performers.
Iconic.
Yeah, just a remarkable, really the only individual who was a superstar in the 1920s and who was still a superstar in the 1960s when he recorded Hello, Dolly and It's a Wonderful World.
I was going to say It's a Wonderful World.
Yeah.
I see skies are blue. You know,
Yep.
That song just blows me away.
Right.
His sensitivities on that are just beautiful.
Yep. So Louis Armstrong really paved the way for the big bands, and he had a very successful big band for many years. Another guy who started the big band sound was Fletcher Henderson, was his name. And he's probably very much forgotten today, but his was really probably the best big band of the late 1920s, early 1930s. Armstrong did play in his band briefly. They had a saxophonist named Coleman Hawkins, who was considered the #1 saxophonist of the day. It was a very popular band. Unfortunately, as we all know, ever been involved in a rock band or any kind of bands do fall apart. They have their good years, their bad years. So unfortunately, Henderson's band had really peaked before the big bands became a craze for the whole country, which was 1936. So his best years were late 20s, early 30s, and then stuff happens. Stuff went wrong. So he did not really enjoy the superstardom and the high level of sales that most of these other people did. But all the musicians credited him as being really probably the first high quality big band.
Wow.
That set the tone.
And it's funny because rock and roll has the same kind of people that we look at and say, wow, they never got paid for their efforts, but we wouldn't exist without them.
Right.
Without standing on their shoulders, we wouldn't be able to go to the next level.
Like Robert Johnson.
Yes, Robert Johnson is a great example of somebody who died way too young. And of course, there's stories surrounding that, which would be a whole nother unexplained episode,
Right.
which I wouldn't mind getting into. I wouldn't mind, because I love talking about conspiracy sometimes about that kind of stuff. But sticking to the big band.
Right. Then another big band artist who was extremely successful during his own lifetime was Duke Ellington.
Yes, Duke. Who
also started his band in the 1920s, quickly became successful, and was very often considered to be the #1 big band at the peak in the late 30s and 1940s. And two of Duke Ellington's big hits were "Take the A Train," which is kind of a raucous, shall we say, medium fast tempo number, and then also "Mood Indigo," which is a slow song, a little bit less characteristic, but it's a very slow, meditative song that once you hear it, you'll probably remember it. So, and Duke Ellington, I think, has not been entirely forgotten, but compared to the kind of superstar he was during his lifetime.
I don't know if it's because of the neighborhood I grew up in or whatever, but I when I grew up, Duke Ellington was big.
Yeah. He's been a little forgotten. And
Count Basie, of course.
Yeah, I'm getting to him.
Okay, good.
And hopefully there'll be a big revival of Duke Ellington's music, because he.
You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah, because what Duke Ellington was able to do was he really thought of the band as a single instrument. So his recordings, is just seamless. The whole band is playing together like one person.
That's what I like, when it's treated like it's a body. Yeah. You got your hands, you got your neck, you got everything else. You put it all together, you got smooth.
Right. And then Duke Ellington's rival was Count Basie, who took his name since the Duke was already a star and Count Basie was up and coming. His birth name was William, but he adopted the name Count to show that he was comparable with Duke Ellington.
Right.
And he had a little bit more of a hard driving, it was called a Kansas City style of a big band, and they were rivals to some extent, although I believe they got along personally, and they were probably the two top black bands, big bands of that era. There was a lot of segregation, so some bands were all black, some bands were all white. Eventually, integration came in, and the big bands were one of society's institutions, which paved the way for integration.
That's
So,
fantastic.
speaking of which, the first superstar who did present an integrated band was Benny Goodman.
Ah, Benny Goodman.
Yes, Benny Goodman, who was his band was on the stage in 1936 when the country discovered that they were crazy about big bands. Just like we talked about Elvis's appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show last time, Benny Goodman was playing a show in Los Angeles. I'm not sure if it was the Ambassador Hotel, but it was one of the big hotels in LA in 1936. And the people just went crazy. And I think it was also played on the radio. And that was the event which really allowed the big bands to develop from one of several styles of emerging music to the number one style of music in the country. And Benny Goodman, one of his hits, which is an instrumental, "Let's Dance," was one of his.
Okay, Let's Dance.
Yeah, Let's Dance, one of his big hits. Another one was "Why Don't You Do Right" with the great singer Peggy Lee.
Yes.
And Benny Goodman was himself actually clarinetist. The first four, Armstrong, of course, was a trumpeter. Henderson, Ellington, and Basie were pianists.
Yeah.
And Benny Goodman was a clarinetist. And you can hear his clarinet prominently in most of his recordings. Another great band of that time was the Glenn Miller Band.
Yeah, you can't forget Glenn Miller.
And Miller, I believe, was a trombonist. And two of his hits was "In the Mood," which we played the beginning of. He also had another one called "Moonlight Serenade."
I know that song.
Yeah, very smooth.
That's a great, I love that song.
Yeah. The great Glenn Miller, instrumentals, although he had big hits with vocals too, like "Chattanooga Choo Choo." And moving on, another very successful band was the Harry James Band, and we just heard from Harry James on the trumpet. And Harry James was one who used that song form extensively, with the band playing the first half of the song, the vocalists coming in for the third quarter, mostly women vocalists for him, although Harry James did have Frank Sinatra in his band for a little while, and then the band coming back for the last chorus.
That's major.
Yeah, Frank
He had
Sinatra.
old blue eyes.
Frank Sinatra started his career with the Harry James big band. Then he went to the Tommy Dorsey big band, and Tommy Dorsey, who I believe was also a trombonist, had a huge band back in the 1940s. One of his big hits was "I'm Getting Sentimental Over You."
Yes.
His sound was a little bit more mellow than some of the other people we've mentioned, but again, one of the most successful big bands of its time.
The flavor worked. The flavor worked. I mean, can you imagine that a Saturday night, you and your wife dancing in the kitchen to that song?
Yeah.
I'm Getting Sentimental Over You, and these are timeless classics.
Yeah. So those were, and of course there were many dozens more of big bands.
Now, where would Nat King Cole fit into this picture?
Well, Nat King Cole, I don't know if he ever did play with a big band. He was a pianist and a singer.
Yeah, because I know he had a lot of musicians around him.
Yeah. Maybe he did make some big band.
I don't know. That's what I was going to ask you.
His heyday came a little bit later, in the late 40s into the 1950s. So
when it was more like pop.
Yeah, he was a great singer. He was a trailblazer for almost all bands in that he both played piano and sang on his recordings, which on the big bands they didn't do that. There were the instrumentalists who concentrated on their instruments, and then you'd have one or two singers who would come in. But Nat King Cole definitely came out of that era, and he had basically a jazz style, but he became very popular. He did. Whether you can argue about whether a specific record is pop or jazz, but in any case, some of Nat King Cole's romantic ballads became some of the big hits of the 1950s. So anyway, we could talk about dozens more big band, but that's just kind of a sampling of some of the biggest of that era.
Can I put you on the spot?
Sure.
Who is your favorite, I mean all-time favorite, female vocalist of that era?
Well, one who I very much love is Kitty Callan, who sang um, with the Harry James Band.
And for our listeners, that's Callen?
No, K. It's
K.
It's K. But it's,
Kitty Callan with a K.
Yeah, and one of her big hits with Harry James was "I Walk Alone," and the lyrics of that song, like the lyrics of a lot of that song, referred to World War II and the fact that a tremendous proportion of all the young men in our country were actually thousands of miles away fighting, and typically the women had to stay at home waiting for them. So "I'll Walk Alone" is one of several. Harry James came a little bit later in the big band history. His biggest years were 44 and 45, when he probably was the number one artist in the country.
Wow.
And so a lot of his biggest hits make reference to that. So we have run out of time.
Have we run out of time already? Is it that time, Martin?
Yes, indeed. And we didn't get to finish everything, but I really enjoyed talking about this. And heaven willing, we'll be able to do another show in a few weeks.
Another great show has gone by, folks. And this time we were able to go back in the time machine to a time when, as you know, there was all kinds of turmoil going on. But out of that turmoil and out of the war and everything else like that, you had this great music with this great spirit that just transcended the world, really, and swept the world with its style. I've been joined by Martin Markovich tonight, and you've been listening to WTRP. This is Cyprian Kane signing off and saying rock on.